The coffee cup hit the kitchen floor with a sharp crack, sending brown liquid splashing across the white tiles. My wife stood there frozen, staring at me like I'd just slapped her across the face. But honestly, after what I'd been hearing about myself for the past 6 months, maybe she had it coming. "What did you just say?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the drip of coffee from the counter edge. I didn't look up from my book immediately. Let her sweat it out for a few seconds. When I finally raised my eyes, I made sure my expression was as neutral as Switzerland. "You heard me. I'm practicing being cold because pretty soon, I won't have to practice anymore." She grabbed the kitchen island for support, her knuckles going white. "I don't understand what you mean." That was Rich, the same woman who'd spent the last year telling her book club friends that I was emotionally unavailable and going nowhere in life, suddenly didn't understand plain English. The same woman who'd laughed with her sister about how I'd let myself go and how she deserved better was now plain confused. "Really?" I closed my book and set it down carefully. "You don't understand? Well, let me help you out. Last Thursday, when you were on the phone with your mother, you said, and I quote, 'I don't know why I settled for someone with so little ambition.' Ring any bells?" Her face went pale. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I continued, "Or how about 2 weeks ago at the barbecue? You told everyone within earshot that I was lucky to have you, and that you could do so much better. Should I go on? You're taking things out of context." "Am I?" I stood up from the kitchen table, my chair scraping against the floor. "Because I've got about 6 months worth of context. 6 months of you telling anyone who'll listen how disappointed you are in your choice of husband. 6 months of you treating me like some kind of consolation prize you're stuck with." She started moving toward me, her hands reaching out. "Honey, you don't understand. I was just venting. Everyone complains about their spouse sometimes." I stepped back, keeping the distance between us. Everyone doesn't spend their time planning their escape route. That stopped her cold. The color drained completely from her face now. "That's right," I said, watching her reaction carefully. "You think I don't notice things? You think I'm too stupid to see what's happening right in front of me? I don't know what you're talking about." But her voice cracked on the last word. I walked over to the kitchen window and looked out at our backyard. The same backyard where she'd told her girlfriends 3 months ago that she was reevaluating her life choices. The same backyard where she'd complained about being tied down to someone who lacks drive. "Here's what I know," I said without turning around. "I know that for the past year, you've been systematically tearing me down to everyone in your life. I know you've been treating me like an embarrassment, and I know you've been laying the groundwork for something." When I turned back to face her, she was crying. But these weren't the tears of someone who felt guilty about hurting their partner. These were the tears of someone who'd been caught. "So when you ask me why I've been cold lately," I continued, "the answer is simple. I'm getting ready for what's coming. I'm building up immunity to caring about someone who clearly stopped caring about me a long time ago." She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her whole body shaking. "This isn't how I wanted things to go." "No," I agreed. "I bet it isn't. But here we are." The coffee was still spreading across the floor, reaching the edge of the kitchen mat. Neither of us moved to clean it up. We just stood there in the wreckage of her carefully laid plans, with the truth finally out in the open. And for the first time in months, I felt completely calm. Looking back, I should have seen it coming years ago. But when you're in the middle of it, when someone slowly chips away at your confidence one comment at a time, you don't notice the pattern until it's almost too late. It started small. 3 years into our marriage, at my company's holiday party, she introduced me to her new coworkers as my husband who works in IT support. Not my husband who's a systems analyst, or my husband who manages network security. Just IT support. Like I fixed printers for a living. When I corrected her later that night, she laughed it off. Does it really matter what I call it? Most people don't understand tech stuff anyway. But it did matter. Because the next month, at her friend's wedding, I became my husband who's decent with computers. By summer, I was my husband who does computer things. Each introduction made me sound smaller, less significant. Then came the physical comments. At first, they were disguised as concern. "Honey, maybe you should come to the gym with me. You know, for your health." That evolved into jokes in front of our friends. "Well, someone's been enjoying my cooking a little too much," she'd say, patting my stomach at dinner parties. The worst part wasn't the comments themselves. It was watching our friends' faces when she said them. The awkward silence. The forced laughter. The way they'd quickly change the subject because even they could see how inappropriate it was. But the real wake-up call came about 8 months ago. We were at her sister's house for Sunday dinner, and the conversation turned to career ambitions. Her brother-in-law had just gotten promoted to regional manager at his company. "That's amazing," my wife said. "I love being around ambitious people. It's so inspiring." Her sister nodded. "Absolutely. There's nothing more attractive than drive and determination." "Exactly," my wife agreed, shooting a quick glance in my direction. "Some people are content to just coast through life, but I've always been drawn to go-getters." The implication was crystal clear. I wasn't a go-getter. I was a coaster. Someone she'd settled for rather than chosen. That night, I started paying closer attention. And once you start looking for a pattern, you can't unsee it. At her office happy hour, she'd mention how some people lack ambition. At neighborhood gatherings, she'd praise other husbands for their initiative while somehow never finding anything praiseworthy about mine. When her college friends visited, she'd steer conversations toward their successful careers while deflecting questions about mine. The breaking point came 6 months ago at her cousin's birthday party. I was getting drinks from the kitchen when I overheard her talking to a group of her female relatives. "Honestly, sometimes I wonder what I was thinking," she said, not knowing I was within earshot. "I mean, he's a good guy, but he has zero drive, zero ambition. He comes home, watches Netflix, and that's his whole life." "Girl, you deserve someone who matches your energy," one of her cousins replied. "I know, right? I'm always pushing myself to grow, to achieve more, and he's just comfortable being mediocre." I stood there with 2 drinks in my hands, listening to my wife describe me like I was some kind of burden she'd been carrying around. Like I was dead weight in her successful, ambitious life. From that moment, everything changed for me. I started documenting every slight, every dismissive comment, every time she made me feel small in public. Not because I was planning revenge, but because I needed to understand if this was really happening or if I was being oversensitive. The evidence was overwhelming. Screenshots of texts to her friends calling me unmotivated. Notes about conversations where she'd compared me unfavorably to other men. Records of social situations where she'd undermined or embarrassed me. But the most damning evidence came from her own actions. The way she'd forget to mention my achievements to people. The way she'd downplay my job when asked about it directly. The way she'd roll her eyes when I expressed opinions about anything career-related. 3 months ago, I made a decision. If she wanted to treat me like I was insignificant, then I'd start acting like she was insignificant too. No more trying to impress her. No more seeking her approval. No more pretending that her constant criticism was helpful feedback. I started responding to her complaints with indifference. When she criticized my clothes, I'd shrug and keep wearing what I wanted. When she made snide remarks about my job, I'd simply nod and change the subject. When she tried to embarrass me in public, I'd just smile and let her words hang in the air without defending myself. The change in my behavior clearly confused her. She was used to getting reactions from me. She was used to me trying harder when she expressed disappointment. But now I was giving her nothing to work with. And apparently, that scared her more than she'd expected. The discovery that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning in March. She'd left for work early, claiming an important meeting with her department head. I was working from home that day, troubleshooting server issues for a client, when I realized she'd forgotten her iPad on the kitchen counter. Normally, I would have driven it to her office without a second thought, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way she'd been secretive about her phone lately, or how she'd started closing her laptop whenever I walked into the room. Whatever it was, curiosity got the better of me. The iPad wasn't password protected. She'd always said she had nothing to hide, so why bother with security? That confidence would prove to be her downfall. The first thing I noticed was a draft email in her personal account. The subject line read, "Consultation request, divorce proceedings." My stomach dropped, but I kept reading. "Dear Attorney Johnson, I am writing to inquire about your services regarding a potential divorce. I am currently married but planning to initiate proceedings within the next 6 to 8 months, once certain financial matters are resolved. I would appreciate a confidential consultation to discuss asset division and alimony considerations." The email was dated 2 weeks earlier, but it was still sitting in her drafts folder. She hadn't sent it yet, but the intent was clear. She wasn't just complaining about our marriage to her friends anymore. She was actively planning her exit strategy. I sat back in my chair, processing what I'd just read. 6 to 8 months. She was giving herself a timeline. But what financial matters needed to be resolved first? That's when I remembered her recent promotion. 3 months ago, she'd been moved to senior marketing manager with a significant salary increase. She'd celebrated by buying herself an expensive watch and talking about finally having the income one deserved. At the time, I thought she was just excited about the career advancement. Now I understood. She'd been waiting until she was financially secure enough to leave me. I kept digging through her messages and found a text conversation with her sister from the previous week. I'm finally in a position where I don't need to depend on anyone else. So you're really going through with it? I think so. I just need to be smart about the timing. Maybe after I get my bonus in June. What about the house? He'll probably have to sell it. There's no way he can afford the payments on his salary alone. Good for you, sis. You've been talking about this for years. Years. She'd been planning this for years. I scrolled back through months of messages, finding conversations I'd never suspected existed. Discussions about life after divorce. Questions about dating apps. Complaints about being stuck in a relationship that's going nowhere. But the most revealing conversation was with her college roommate from last month. I've outgrown him completely. When we got married, I thought he had potential, but he's exactly the same person he was 5 years ago. Have you told him how you feel? What's the point? He's not going to suddenly become ambitious just because I ask him to. Some people are just content with mediocrity. So what are you going to do? I'm building my case, documenting everything, making sure I come out of this in the best position possible. Building her case. That explains so much. The constant criticism wasn't just her being unsatisfied with our marriage. It was her creating a narrative where I was the problem, where she was justified in leaving, where she was the victim who'd tried everything to make it work. I found folders on her iPad labeled financial planning and living arrangements. She'd been researching apartments in the city, calculating her post-divorce budget, even looking at furniture for her new place. She'd planned every detail of her new life without me. But here's what she hadn't counted on. I wasn't the same person she thought I was. While she'd been busy documenting my supposed failures, I'd been quietly succeeding at work. My last performance review had come with a promotion opportunity one hadn't mentioned to her yet. My investment portfolio had grown significantly over the past year. The side consulting work I did on weekends had built up a nice savings account she didn't know about. She'd been so focused on portraying me as unsuccessful that she'd stopped paying attention to my actual success. I screenshot everything. Every conversation, every draft email, every search for divorce lawyers. Then I copied all of it to a secure cloud storage account she couldn't access. By the time she came home that evening, complaining about her stressful day and how some people don't understand how hard I work, I had a complete picture of her deception. She asked why I seemed distracted during dinner. I told her I was just thinking about some work stuff. She nodded sympathetically and said she understood how overwhelming my job could be. The irony was almost funny. Here she was, expressing fake concern about my fake stress, while I was sitting on evidence of her real betrayal. That night, as she slept beside me, probably dreaming about her new independent life, I lay awake making my own plans. If she wanted to play games, I could play games too. But unlike her, I wasn't going to wait months to make my move. The student was about to become the teacher. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Not because I was actually sick, but because I had some important appointments to make. First stop, my own attorney consultation. Unlike my wife's cautious approach, I didn't waste time with draft emails or hesitation. I walked into the law office of Thompson & Associates at 9 sharp and laid everything out on the table. The screenshots, the documented conversations, the evidence of her planning and preparation. The lawyer, an experienced woman in her 50s, reviewed everything with interest. Your wife has been quite thorough in her planning, she said. Unfortunately for her, thorough planning works both ways. By noon, I had my own strategy mapped out. Property assessments, asset evaluations, and a clear understanding of my rights. More importantly, I understood her vulnerabilities. Her timeline depended on secrecy and maintaining the element of surprise. Take that away, and her entire plan crumbled. The second phase of my response began that afternoon. If she wanted to treat me like I was invisible, I'd give her exactly what she'd asked for. But instead of the defeated invisibility she expected, I'd give her strategic indifference. When she came home from work, I was reading on the couch. She started telling me about her day, how exhausting her meetings were, how much pressure she was under. I listened without comment, nodded occasionally, and went back to my book when she finished. "That's it?" she asked. "No questions? No support?" I looked up briefly. "Sounds like you handled it fine on your own." She stood there for a moment, clearly expecting more engagement. When she didn't get it, she tried a different approach. "I was thinking we could try that new restaurant downtown this weekend. Spend some quality time together." "I've got plans," I replied without elaborating. "What plans?" "Just plans." The confusion on her face was obvious. For months, she'd been complaining that I never took initiative, that I was too comfortable with routine. Now that I was showing independence, she didn't know how to handle it. Over the next few weeks, I maintained this new dynamic. I stopped asking about her day. I stopped trying to make conversation during dinner. When she criticized something about the house or my habits, I'd simply say okay and continue with whatever I was doing. But the real shift happened when we were around other people. At her friend's birthday party, she tried to pull her usual routine of making subtle digs about my lack of ambition. But instead of getting defensive or trying to prove myself, I just smiled and let her words sit in the awkward silence. "Well," she said, clearly fishing for a reaction, "some of us are content with where we are in life." "Absolutely," I agreed cheerfully. "Contentment is underrated." Her friends looked confused. This wasn't the script they were used to. Usually, these moments involved me trying to defend myself or her having to smooth over the tension she'd created. But now I was just agreeing with her assessment while somehow making her look petty for bringing it up. She tried again later in the evening. "I keep telling him he should be more proactive about his career, but you know how men can be about taking advice." I nodded thoughtfully. "She's absolutely right. I should probably listen to career advice from someone who's had such remarkable success." The comment was perfectly neutral on the surface, but everyone at the table knew her career history. She'd been passed over for several promotions before finally getting her current position. My subtle acknowledgement of her remarkable success highlighted just how ordinary her achievements actually were. She spent the rest of the party trying to recover from that exchange, but the damage was done. Her friends had witnessed her attempting to embarrass me and somehow ending up embarrassed herself. This became my new strategy. Instead of defending myself against her attacks, I'd redirect them back to her in ways that exposed her behavior without making me look vindictive. When she complained about my lack of growth, I'd thank her for being so invested in my development. When she made jokes about my appearance, I'd express gratitude for her detailed observations. The effect was remarkable. People started noticing how often she criticized me and how graciously I handled it. The narrative she'd been building about our marriage began to shift. Instead of seeing me as the problem, people started seeing her as needlessly harsh. But the most satisfying moment came 3 weeks after my discovery. We were at a neighborhood barbecue, and she was talking to a group of wives about career goals and ambition. As usual, she started making veiled references to people who settle for less and don't push themselves. That's when our neighbor asked directly, "What exactly does your husband do? You mention work sometimes, but never really explain it." Before she could give one of her dismissive responses, I spoke up. "I manage cybersecurity for mid-sized companies. Boring stuff, really. Data protection, threat assessment, compliance consulting. Nothing as exciting as marketing campaigns." Our neighbor's husband, who worked in finance, immediately perked up. "That's huge right now. Every company I work with is desperate for good cybersecurity people. The demand must be incredible." "It keeps me busy," I said modestly, "especially with the consulting work on the side." "You do consulting too?" another neighbor asked. "That must be lucrative." I shrugged. "It pays the bills." My wife stood there listening to this conversation with growing discomfort. For months, she'd been portraying me as professionally stagnant, while I'd apparently been building a consulting business she knew nothing about. The other wives were looking at her with confusion, trying to reconcile her complaints about my lack of ambition with the reality they were hearing. After the party, she cornered me at home. "Since when do you do consulting work?" "Since always," I replied. "You never asked. Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at her with genuine curiosity. Would it have mattered? "You've made it pretty clear that my work isn't worth discussing." She opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to realize the trap she'd created for herself. If she claimed she cared about my career, it would contradict months of dismissive behavior. If she admitted she didn't care, she'd be confirming exactly what I'd just said. That's not fair, she finally managed. Maybe not, I agreed. But it's accurate. For the first time since I discovered her plans, I saw genuine uncertainty in her eyes. The confident woman who'd been systematically planning her exit strategy was starting to realize that maybe she didn't know her husband as well as she thought she did. And that was exactly where I wanted her. The first sign that she was starting to panic came 2 weeks later. I walked into the kitchen one morning to find her making pancakes from scratch. She hadn't cooked breakfast in over a year, claiming she was too busy with work for that kind of thing. Surprise, she said with forced cheerfulness. I thought we could have a nice breakfast together before work. I poured myself coffee and sat down. Thanks. This is unexpected. I've been thinking we don't spend enough quality time together, she continued, flipping pancakes with exaggerated care. Maybe we should plan a weekend getaway. You know, reconnect. Reconnect with what exactly? I asked, genuinely curious about her answer. She paused mid-flip. With each other. With what made us happy in the first place. I nodded and ate my pancakes without further comment. They were actually pretty good, but I wasn't about to give her the enthusiastic response she was clearly fishing for. Over the next few days, she ramped up these efforts. Suddenly, she was interested in my work projects. She asked detailed questions about my consulting clients. She complimented my clothes, my haircut, even my choice of Netflix shows. The woman who'd spent months criticizing everything about me was now acting like I was the most fascinating person she'd ever met. But the most telling moment came when we ran into her coworker at the grocery store. This was the same woman who'd heard months of complaints about my lack of motivation and settling for mediocrity. This is my husband, my wife said, practically beaming. The cybersecurity expert I told you about. Her coworker looked confused. I thought you said he worked in IT support? There was an awkward pause before my wife recovered. Well, yes, but he does much more than that. He's actually quite successful. I watched this exchange with detached amusement. She was literally rewriting history in real time, trying to undo months of damage to my reputation among her social circle. The desperation became more obvious when she started initiating physical affection. Random hugs when I was working at my desk. Hand-holding during our evening walks that she'd suddenly insisted we resume. Attempts at romantic dinners with candles and wine. I feel like we've been distant lately, she said during one of these manufactured intimate moments. I want to fix that. Distant how? I asked. You know, emotionally. Physically. We used to be so connected. I sipped my wine and considered this. When exactly do you think we were connected? Because I've been feeling distant for quite a while now. She reached across the table and took my hand. That's what I'm trying to address. I know I haven't been the most supportive wife lately. Lately? Okay, maybe longer than lately. But I want to change that. I want us to be a team again. The irony was staggering. The woman who'd been secretly planning to divorce me was now talking about teamwork and connection. But her most desperate move came 3 weeks after the pancake breakfast. I was working late in my home office when she appeared in the doorway wearing lingerie I hadn't seen in over a year. Come to bed, she said in what she probably thought was a seductive voice. I miss you. I looked up from my laptop. I've got a client deadline tomorrow. The work can wait, she said, moving closer. We can't. Actually, the work can't wait. The client is paying me quite well for this project. She sat on the edge of my desk, clearly not giving up. Since when did you become such a workaholic? Since I realized how much I enjoy being successful at something. The comment hit her exactly as intended. She'd spent months diminishing my professional achievements, and now I was throwing her own criticisms back at her. She tried a different approach. I've been thinking about what you said before, about me not appreciating your work. You're right. I should have been more supportive. Should have been, I repeated. Past tense. It doesn't have to be past tense. I can change. I saved my work and closed the laptop. Why would you want to change? According to you, I'm the one who lacks ambition and drive. I'm the one who's content with mediocrity. Why would someone as successful and motivated as you want to change for someone like me? She stared at me, trapped by her own words. Every criticism she'd made about me was now a wall preventing her from convincing me she actually valued our relationship. I didn't mean those things, she said quietly. Which things specifically? The part about me having zero drive? The part about you deserving better? The part about wondering what you were thinking when you married me? Her face went pale. She hadn't realized I'd overheard that particular conversation. You heard that? I hear a lot of things. The question is, why should I believe that you didn't mean any of it? Because it seemed pretty heartfelt at the time. She started crying then, but these weren't the calculated tears from our kitchen confrontation. These were the tears of someone who'd realized they'd miscalculated badly. I was just frustrated, she said through the tears. Marriage is hard. Sometimes people say things they don't mean. For months, I asked, you've been saying things you didn't mean for months? To multiple people? In detailed conversations about how disappointing I am. She couldn't answer that because we both knew the truth. She'd meant every word when she said it. She just didn't mean it now that her exit strategy was falling apart. I know I've made mistakes, she finally said. But we can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our backyard where she'd had so many conversations about leaving me. Here's the thing, I said without turning around. You've spent the better part of a year convincing everyone in your life that I'm not worth staying married to. Your family, your friends, your coworkers. You've built an entire case about why you deserve better than me. I can fix that. The problem is, I continued, I've started to agree with you. The silence that followed was deafening. She stood there in her lingerie, crying, while the full weight of her situation finally hit her. She'd been so focused on documenting my failures that she'd never considered what would happen if I stopped trying to prove her wrong. She'd wanted a husband who would fight for her attention, compete for her approval, beg for her validation. Instead, she'd created a husband who'd simply stopped caring what she thought. And now, faced with my complete indifference to her opinion, she finally understood what she'd actually lost. The end came on a Saturday morning in June, exactly when she'd planned to execute her own exit strategy. The irony wasn't lost on me. I found her in the kitchen, frantically scrolling through her phone. She'd been increasingly agitated over the past week, making phone calls in private and spending hours on her laptop with a worried expression. Problem? I asked, pouring myself coffee. She looked up, her eyes red from what appeared to be a sleepless night. I need to talk to you about something important. Sure. I sat down across from her, curious to see how she'd play this final hand. I know things have been rocky between us lately, she began, her voice shaking slightly. But I think we should consider couples therapy. Really commit to fixing our marriage. I sipped my coffee and waited for her to continue. I've already found a therapist. Dr. Williams comes highly recommended. She has an opening next week if you're willing to try. Why now? I asked simply. The question seemed to throw her off balance. What do you mean, why now? Because our marriage is worth fighting for. Is it? Because 6 months ago, you told your sister that you'd outgrown me completely. 3 months ago, you researched divorce attorneys. Last month, you were looking at apartments downtown. I paused, watching her face go completely white. So I'm curious about this sudden change of heart. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The game was over, and we both knew it. I pulled out my phone and opened a folder I'd prepared weeks earlier. Would you like to see the screenshots? The draft emails? The conversations about your timeline and exit strategy? Her hands started trembling. How did you? Your iPad. You left it unlocked that Tuesday morning in March. Remember? The morning you had that important meeting with your department head. I showed her the screen. Turns out you were meeting with Attorney Johnson instead. The color drained completely from her face. She stared at the evidence of her deception, her carefully constructed plans laid bare. I can explain. Actually, you can't, I interrupted calmly. Because I've spent the last 3 months having my own consultations. With my own attorney. With a financial advisor. With a real estate agent. She looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. What are you saying? I set down my phone and looked at her directly. I'm saying that while you were busy planning to leave me, I was planning to leave you. The difference is, I actually followed through. I don't understand. The divorce papers are being filed on Monday. You'll be served by Wednesday. The house goes on the market next Friday. I stood up, finishing my coffee. You have until the end of the month to find somewhere else to live. She shot up from her chair. You can't do this. This is my home too. Actually, it's not. The mortgage is in my name only. My credit, my down payment, my responsibility. You can check with your attorney friend if you'd like legal confirmation. The panic in her eyes was complete now. But I don't have anywhere to go. I can't afford. That's unfortunate. Maybe you should have considered that before spending a year telling everyone how much better you could do without me. She started pacing around the kitchen. This is insane. We can work this out. I made mistakes. But people make mistakes. You're absolutely right. I agreed. People do make mistakes. Your mistake was assuming I was too stupid, too passive, and too comfortable to notice what you were doing. I never said you were stupid. No, you just treated me like I was. For months, in front of everyone we know. I rinsed my coffee cup and placed it in the dishwasher. The good news is, you won't have to pretend I'm worth staying married to anymore. She followed me toward the door, desperation clear in her voice. Please, can we just talk about this? Really talk. I turned back to her one final time. We are talking. I'm telling you that your plan worked perfectly. You convinced me that you deserve better than me. You convinced everyone else too. Congratulations. I was wrong. No, you were right. You do deserve better than a husband who lacks ambition and drive. Someone who's content with mediocrity. I smiled without warmth. The problem is, I also deserve better than a wife who spent a year systematically destroying my reputation while planning her escape. She sank back into her chair, the full reality of her situation finally hitting her. What am I supposed to tell people? Tell them the truth. Tell them you got exactly what you wanted. Over the next month, watching her scramble to rebuild her life was almost educational. She'd burned so many bridges with her constant complaints about our marriage that even her closest friends seemed unsurprised by the divorce news. Her sister, who'd supported the divorce plan when it was my wife's idea, was noticeably less enthusiastic when the tables were turned. Her mother, who'd agreed that she deserved better, seemed confused when better meant living in a studio apartment and splitting grocery costs with a roommate. The house sold quickly. Turns out my mediocre job had allowed me to build significant equity, while her ambitious spending had contributed nothing to our actual wealth. By August, I'd moved into a downtown condo with a view of the river. My consulting business was thriving, largely because I now had the time and energy to focus on it properly. The weight of constantly defending myself, constantly trying to earn approval from someone who'd already decided I wasn't worth it, was gone. She tried calling a few times in those first weeks. Messages about closure and talking things through. I never answered. There was nothing left to discuss. The last I heard, she was dating someone new. Her social media posts showed pictures of them at expensive restaurants and weekend trips. She was back to her pattern of public displays, trying to prove her happiness to an audience. I genuinely hope she's happy. More importantly, I hope she's learned something from the experience. But that's not my concern anymore. The coffee stain from that morning in June is still on the kitchen floor of our old house. The new owners will probably replace those tiles eventually, but for now, it's still there. A permanent reminder of the moment when pretending everything was fine finally became impossible. I don't miss the marriage. I don't miss the constant criticism, the social embarrassment, or the feeling of being perpetually disappointing to someone who'd stopped valuing me years ago. What I do miss, sometimes, is the person I thought she was when we first got married. But that person was probably never real. She was just the version of herself she presented when she still thought I might be worth the effort. The irony is that in the end, she was right about one thing. She did deserve better than a husband who would tolerate being treated like a consolation prize. And I deserved better than a wife who saw me as one. Turns out we both got what we deserved.